What am I saying again?
This is MPW,
MPW,
the podcast.
with your host,
Xylo Aria. Cool.
A podcast about music production
for the everyday musician.
where we learn from experienced studio engineers and each other.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MPW podcast. I'm your host, Xylo Aria, and on this episode, I am very excited to welcome our amazing guest, Olga Fitzroy. So, Olga, for those who don't know, is an incredible recording and mixing engineer. She's worked with some amazing artists, including Coldplay, Muse, the Foo Fighters, and Hanz Zimmer, one of my favorite film scorers. So really excited to have her here. So hello, Olga.
Hi.
Thanks so much for being on this episode. So before we get into our topic, let's talk about you, but also, how's your day been so far? All right?
Yeah, not too bad. Busy. Dropped the kid off at nursery, had a meeting, came back here.
Oh, so a lot done already.
Yeah.
No, that's good. That's good. So, yeah, tell me a bit about you and how you got into recording and the kind of tech side of music and where it all started for you.
Yeah, so I was always into music as a kid and as a teenager growing up. And then when I was about 15, I did a week's work experience in a theatre playing with sound and lighting stuff.
Yeah.
And that's when I suddenly thought, oh, there's a job here where I can play with music and sound all day.
Yeah.
And for a while, my plan A was to be a drummer in a punk band and being an engineer was plan B. But then that quite soon swapped around to being plan A.
Yeah, fair enough. I feel like a few of the guests I've spoken to, that seems to be the trend, especially starting in the rock side of things.
Yeah.
Being in a rock band and then wanting to record the band and then kind of that taking over everything. So, and then you went on to study sound engineering?
Yeah, so I left school at 17, went to college, and then at the end of those 2 years, I realised I wasn't any closer to getting a job in a studio than I was at the start. So then I did a course called the Tonmeister course down in Guildford at Surrey University, and they actually make you do a year in industry. So I was really lucky to get a job here at Air Studios for a year, just, being a runner, making tea for people. And then they offered me a job to come back to when I graduated. So then I spent the next 10 years sort of working my way up from tea girl to engineer.
Yeah, incredible. And how did that come about? I mean, like, we're sitting in Air Studios right now and I'm looking around. It's incredible. Like, it's such a beautiful room. And I assume that opportunity doesn't often come around so easily.
No, I was really lucky. I mean, the course that I did, they had a relationship with Air Studios, so they'd sent people on placements there before. So that gave me the opportunity to have an interview, and then I guess it was just a bit of luck on my side, right place and right time. And I made the most of my placement and they let me come back.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. So when you got into while you were studying and all that, did you know that the tech side of music was what you really enjoyed, or did you consider yourself as a tech person, really?
It's funny because I don't consider myself a tech person. I guess I was capable of learning enough to make it work, but, I don't know how the desks actually work inside. I couldn't fix them if they're broken, but I know enough to use them. And I think sometimes people are a bit scared and go, oh, it's so technical, it's not for me. But I think, with a bit of patience, most people can learn enough to be able to use it to do what they need to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. Like, you immediately think of the the wiring and all the kind of knobs and what they do, whereas at the end of the day, the job is about sound, right? And it's whether you can pick out what needs to be done with the sound rather than the technology is to aid you in doing
Exactly.
that, and that's not the only part of the job, really.
Exactly. I mean, there's more technical people than me that maintain all this equipment and design it and build it. But I think for a lot of studio engineers, some are more technical. But for me, it's about using it. And as long as I've got the tools to do my job, I don't need to get too in depth with how they work.
Yeah. No, it's good to know. It's good to know. And that was one thing that took me so long just to get into music production is just that immediately I just thought of the tech side of everything. And I think that put me off for a long time. And anyone else out there that's thinking the same thing, just, don't let that be the thing that puts you off. So the first thing usually I do with my guests is to summarize the topic or define it in one sentence. But I guess recording is quite self-explanatory. But was there a particular definition of it that you wanted to bring?
I guess just capturing the performance. And for some types of recording, you want it to sound as close to what it sounds like in the room. But then for other types of record, you're actually adding quite a lot. Because like if you imagine going into a rehearsal room and standing next to a drum kit, it sounds really horrible.
Yes.
But obviously on a record, they can sound amazing. So for that type of recording, you're actually adding something and creating something and making it your own a little bit.
Yeah, that's good. Actually, I didn't think of adding that to it. And also for anyone a bit confused about what we're recording, we can record audio and we can record MIDI as well, but we're not talking about MIDI today. So we're just talking about audio recording, which Olga is an expert at. So one thing I wanted to talk about was the different elements that create a good recording. So what are they? And then maybe we'll go through a few of them as well.
Sure. So I guess in a band recording, you've got a rhythm track, which is drums and bass, but it can be programming as well, or synth bass, I guess, percussion. And that's often like the kind of basis of a track. And then you'll obviously have the kind of more harmonic things like guitars, keys, synths. And then you've got lead lines like lead guitars and vocals, obviously.
And as far as when we record these, I guess there's a few different variables in play, right? So there's the microphone that you use, there's the actual thing that you're recording, then there's the room, and I assume those are the main elements that go into it pre-recording, and then the other things would be post, right? So was there anything that I missed in that list that you think?
Did you say the instrument as well? I can't remember.
Yeah, so the thing that you're recording, so the instrument or the voice or whatever.
Yeah.
So if we go into those, obviously you can go into depth in all of them, as far as having the perfectly treated room and all that kind of thing. But if we go into each of those and your experiences in different rooms and all that. So if we start with maybe the environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing out of all of those is the performance.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's more important than the instrument, like the thing you're recording, and it's more important than the microphone or the room or any of that. So it's about making the performer feel comfortable and giving them what they need so they can hear themselves, hear the rest of the band. Yeah. So that is the most important thing.
Yeah. On that, actually, I think it's really good that you bring that up, because whenever I'm writing something, I feel like it's always invariably in the middle of the night, and I record something like in my home studio, and I'm just recording it, and I'm like, oh, whatever, it's just a rough recording, I'll redo that later. But then for some reason I can never get that performance back, and every time I try and do it again with obviously a better mic and making sure there's no other sound around and all that, it just becomes so meticulous, and it's a better quality recording, but then
hasn't got the magic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you and everybody else, like.
Okay, that's good to know. Actually, it's good to know it's just not me, because it's so frustrating.
I think there is just like that magic moment in time, and it's got something special about it, and it has got something amazing about it, or it might be your relationship with that performance, how you feel about it. So we always say in the studio, there's no such thing as a demo. There's no such thing as a guide vocal. So if you are recording, try and use something that is good enough to use on a record. Like, it doesn't need to be perfect, but just get it so if you needed to use it, you can use it.
That's good advice. Yeah. So Catherine Marks, I mentioned before, so she was talking about that and how she often goes back to the original recording, whether it was the demo or the phone recording or whatever it was, to make sure that that magic isn't lost
Yeah.
in the final product. Is there a certain way that you go about getting that back, or is it just using that initial recording?
It depends. Sometimes sometimes you do end up just using that, and there are plenty of records that have got phone memos and random recordings on them.
Oh, no way.
Or like, something played on a really rubbish Casio keyboard or something that end up on the final record. And I think there's a lot of time and money spent going round in circles trying to capture that magic and then deciding to actually use the original thing.
Right.
But that's not always the case. Obviously, sometimes the demo will have bits that you like, but then bits that you want to change.
Yeah.
So I think Catherine's right. Reference back and see where you are in relation to that original demo. Make sure you're making it better rather than worse.
Yeah, can happen. And then like going back to the other elements as well. So the environment that you're in, how important do you think it is to have the perfectly treated room, and what is that really?
Again, I sort of think it's more about, I guess, how people feel. It depends on what you're recording. I mean, if you're recording drums, then obviously the sound of the room is important. Or if you haven't got a very big room, then just having a really dry room that then you can add stuff to later. I think the worst thing would be like a room that's got some weird reflections and kind of slapbacks and difficult things to deal with. If in doubt, make it as dry as possible and then be creative after you've recorded it.
Yeah. And for anyone that doesn't know, dry is just, as dead a sound that we can get. Like if you have a room where there's a lot of reflection and natural reverb in the room, then that's kind of the opposite of dry.
Yeah.
So, like people used to say, get into your closet or whatever, if that's what you have for a vocal recording and stuff. And I don't know, would you recommend that?
Probably not really. I would say, if you're just recording at home, you can buy these reflection filters quite cheaply and they can get rid of any kind of, or most kind of funny reflections in the room. And if you're in a room in your house and you've got a carpet on the floor, maybe some curtains up, then you can probably get something pretty usable as long as it's not too much traffic noise or anything like that.
Yeah. And then there's obviously the mic that
Yeah.
you're using to record. How much time would you spend on finding the right mic for what you're recording?
Again, it depends on what level you're at. So if I'm doing lead vocals with someone I've not worked with before, we might then set up maybe 3 mics and see which one suits their voice best. Obviously, some people that have been recording for years and years might have a favourite mic that they always use. So you just go with that because often, they know what they want their voice to sound like. And then for people recording at home, I think obviously budget is a huge part of it. So I think that would sort of dictate what type of mic you'd get, really.
Yeah. And as far as your experiences, so you have worked with, a range of bands and as well as big orchestras and that kind of thing. Would you say there's a bit of planning involved before you start the recording process, and what happens before you actually get into the studio?
Yeah, there's always planning involved. So on a recording session for an orchestra, it's very, very scheduled. You've got a certain number of hours and a certain number of pieces to record, and you know what everyone's going to be playing. So you can plan that quite meticulously, like what mics you put, and you plug them all in the day before, test it all, and it's quite rigorous and quite strict. With a band, you might not have that sort of a structure, but you still need to do a lot of planning. Particularly if it's a band that likes to do random things, swap instruments, bring something new in, suddenly decide they want to do a string quartet in the middle of the day, then again, the more planning you can do, the better you are at then dealing with the random stuff that comes along. So again, make sure you've got everything set up and working, everything that they might even possibly think about playing, not just the things that they've told you they're going to play, but have everything ready to go.
And as far as recording a band, so my music is very like solo artist kind of thing. So a lot of it is electronic, and the only thing that I am recording is my voice.
Yeah.
But in a band scenario, I guess there's so many different ways of doing that. Like some people, I assume, would record everything together, or some people would like to split everything up. Is there a way that you think works better than another way, or have any advice on that?
I think it's always best to have everybody playing together if possible, even if you then like replace some of the other parts and you might only keep the drums or the drums and the bass. I think if everyone's playing together, then they can, you just get that magic happening with a band.
So you wouldn't split them?
Unless they specifically want to, and you might do that to do like a guitar solo overdub and do some bits separately, but to do the basic tracking, I think to get the rhythm track, I think most of the time you'd want to track them all together. Again, but you'd be guided by the musicians. If the drummer has gone, right, we've played it a few times as a band, actually I don't need this anymore, or I can play to like a guide track that they've done, then that's cool as well. But I'd always have the option for them to play together.
Okay, yeah. Good to know. And yeah, like you said, that feel of playing all together is never going to happen if you separate everything out. So in the recording process as well, I feel like it's quite like the band brings most the creative element of it. But how much creative input would you say you have as an engineer in that?
It really depends on the band and the producer, but often, and you might be guided more by the producer perhaps than the band, but often the band might just have the arrangements and be playing stuff, but they might have no idea about what sort of drum sound they want, or they might give you some references of different bits of music that you've then got to try and figure out how to recreate that. So I think it's about creating sounds either that you're sort of being given references for, or you can be completely creative and a bit more free and figure out something that sounds cool and that works.
Yeah, I was talking about this to someone else the other day about like mic placement for different types of instruments that you're recording. Is there some sort of golden rule that you use every time, or is it quite specific for what you're recording of where things need to go?
Yeah, it tends to be quite specific. So with drums, the thing that I spend a lot of time doing is for the overhead mics, I'll like measure the distance from the left and the right to the snare and to the kick drum. So that then when you pan them hard left and right, your snare and your kick are bang in the middle.
Right.
So I spend time getting that right, and I spend time making sure the mics are all in phase with each other as well.
Yeah. Okay. And is there a certain number of mics that you always use for a drum kit, for example?
Not specifically, but if I don't know the drummer or don't know that much about it, I'll always have, say, 2 kick drum mics, a snare top and bottom, a mic on each tom, hats and overheads, and a ride mic would be a sort of starting point. And then, if they've got more toms or if there's something specific or weird they want to do, I might add extra things, but that's kind of the starting point.
Okay. And if you had one piece of advice that you have for someone kind of getting into recording, what would that be?
I'd say don't worry about the tech, don't be intimidated by it. I think anyone can learn enough to plug in a microphone, turn up the gain and record something and capture a performance. So yeah, don't be scared.
Yeah. Yes. And that's what the whole essence of MPW is really, is that let's just get over that initial fear, and then once you get started, you'll probably realize it's not as scary as you think. And probably like as you got more and more into it, the tech side of things excited you more than it did at the start, like for example learning about different mics and all that, I would assume.
Yeah, there's still, I still like different types of mics and seeing what they sound like, but ultimately it's just about making things sound good, and however you get there, some people are like super techie, some people are scared of it, but as long as you can make a great sounding record, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. And one thing that I ask people sometimes, and it's quite an interesting question, is that you've obviously been around some really successful musicians that are doing amazing things. Is there a certain like personality trait or quality that you would say sets people apart as to someone that's making a career out of it as opposed to not?
I think it's probably a level of perfectionism and being determined to get something right and putting in the time and keeping going, even when they're tired or people are frustrated or people are telling them that it's not right. It's the sort of determination to keep going. I think that, even with artists with different personalities, it's a wanting to keep going till it's right. Yeah, determination is definitely one that comes up a lot. But perfectionism is an interesting thing to talk about, I think. Like, how
how far down that rabbit hole do you go, really, personally? Because I feel like you can get so caught up in that, and then eventually nothing happens because you're just perfecting and perfecting, and you might have actually gone the other way.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I say perfectionism, there's definitely some that tweak every tiny little thing, but then there's also other artists who go a long way down that road, and then they go, it's still not right, and might go back to a version, 6 versions ago or a bit of the demo, but they will try all the avenues in their sort of quest for getting it right. But yeah, the final version might not be something that's 100% perfect, but they've tried every avenue, and they've got somewhere, and they're convinced that the thing that they've got is the right one, even if it's not perfect. So it could be like that magic first take that's got some special magic.
Yeah.
Or it could be something that they spent 6 weeks re-recording and adding bits to.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, so that's something that I always struggle with, I think, is knowing when to let something go. And yeah, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that, really.
Yeah.
So I have a few questions from some people around the world. One is she's got 2 questions from Agnieszka Olek. So she's from Ireland. And her question was, do you have any particular advice for recording multiple layers of string instruments and keeping that sound clean?
I would say, make sure you're doing it in a quiet room, because it adds up if there's lots of noise. What you can do sometimes that helps a bit is maybe move your position relative to the mic, if it's just you playing the violin or cello or whatever. And also you can mix it in with synths as well. That sometimes works, again, to create that effect of lots of strings.
Okay. Is there actually something you would do like After Effects to make something sound a bit bigger?
Reverb.
Yeah.
Yeah, reverb is your friend with all that stuff as well.
Yeah, okay. And actually, her second question was that, do you ever work with unsigned artists? And if you do, is there something particular you're looking for in their work to then work with them?
I don't know. I've worked with lots of unsigned artists, and, as long as I'm enjoying the music, and I think I'll always say to them, make sure it's ready to mix, like any editing, any tuning, any of that stuff. If you want someone to mix it, just make sure that's ready. Mm-hmm. Or if you're about to record, make sure you're rehearsed, your tempos, like all of that stuff, just make sure it's ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Otherwise, it's a waste of everyone's time and money,
yeah,
I guess, as well. And then I had another question from a Louise Lay from London. So she said, do you have any advice on maintaining originality in your work, as far as bringing in creativity without, I guess, engineering your there's a lot of work that you're copying certain ways of doing things. Do you have a way to keep your style?
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about keeping your style, because every project you're working on is different, and I think your way of working will kind of inform your style. There's plenty of techniques and things that you can borrow or steal from other people and other projects. Doesn't mean that project will sound the same as the previous project.
Yeah.
A lot of things I might, use a drum sound that I saw someone from America use 10 years ago, but then, use something else that someone else has used, and then and have something else that's a random accident. So I just wouldn't worry too much about that, really.
Yeah.
As long as it sounds good and the clients are happy, then that's the main part, really.
Yeah, for sure. And I have a book called Steal Like an Artist, and that's what art is all about, isn't it? Just stealing bits of it and then kind of turning it into your own, and that's all part of it, really. And then I had another question from a Flavia Oliveira. So she was asking about room mics and how you can make that, sound good, or if you have any advice on that, because she was struggling with her sound from them and saying it's never good enough to get in on the mix.
Yeah, so I guess it depends on what type of room you're recording in. Obviously, if you're in a really big reverberant room, then you can get really interesting sounds on room mics. But if you're in a smaller, more dry room, then it might just sound like a bit phasey with what you're doing. But you can still be quite creative if you're recording drums in quite a dry, smallish studio. You can still put a room mic somewhere different, like down a corridor, and compress it lots. So I think that's a way of kind of mixing it up a bit and getting them sounding a bit more interesting.
And you were saying if it doesn't sound good, just leave it out as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. So for a lot of things, it might not be appropriate. It's always worth recording it. If
Yeah.
you've got a spare mic, why not? But if you don't use it, then, you're not losing anything.
Yeah, yeah. And can you just define, actually, for people, what is phasing?
So phasing is when you've got two mics, say, on a drum kit. And if you just listen to one, it sounds great. You can hear the kick drum and everything. And then if you mix in the other one, your kick drum disappears. And that's because the two waveforms are actually opposite and they cancel each other out. So the way to combat that is either there's a phase button on your mixing desk or your mic pre, so that will reverse the phase and stop that cancellation. Or if it's a little bit halfway and you can't quite tell, then moving the mic is another way of addressing that.
Yeah. No, good to know and clarify that for some people. But other than that, I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about, unless there was any specific thing that you wanted to give people advice on, or...
I don't think so. I guess just, get stuck in and don't worry if you haven't got like the most expensive equipment or the most fancy mics. Like I said, it's all about the performance. Bono records on an SM58, so if it's good enough for him, then it's good enough for most people, I think.
Incredible. That's yeah, everyone, that's exactly it. So just get into it and then worry about all those details later, and you'll work it out when you get there anyway. But thank you so much for having me, Olga. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you have a great